Christmas had always been my favorite time of the year. The lights, the decorations, the laughter filling the house, it was like magic. Every year, I looked forward to this day, to being with my husband, Mark, surrounded by the people I loved most. I spent weeks preparing for the perfect evening, making sure everything was flawless, down to the last detail. This year, I had worked harder than ever, trying to make sure everything was special. The house was filled with the warm, delicious smell of my homemade Christmas dinner: roast turkey, mashed potatoes, and a dozen other dishes I'd prepared myself. The Christmas tree stood tall in the corner of the living room, adorned with twinkling lights and colorful ornaments that had been collected over the years. Everything felt perfect. I was in my element. I had always prided myself on making the holidays a time to remember, a time to cherish. And this year, I was especially excited because it was our first Christmas in this house, the house Mark and I had bought just a year ago. I felt like everything was falling into place. Our life was perfect. "Dinner's almost ready," I called to Mark as I checked the turkey in the oven. I could hear him in the other room, arranging the Christmas playlist we had created together. "Sounds good," he replied, his voice distant. I paused for a moment, listening to the tone in his voice. It sounded strange, distracted, but I brushed it off. It was Christmas Eve, of course. We were both a little stressed. The holidays had a way of doing that to you. I told myself he was just busy. Mark came into the kitchen a few minutes later, and I smiled at him. His face was handsome, as always, though something about his eyes seemed different. He leaned over to give me a quick kiss on the cheek. "You look beautiful," he said, but his voice sounded a little hollow, and the kiss didn't feel the way it usually did. He pulled away quickly and turned back toward the living room. I watched him for a second, my smile faltering slightly. He had been acting strange for a few weeks now, distant, quieter than usual. At first, I thought it was just work stress, or maybe the pressure of the holiday season. But as the days passed, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was off. Tonight, it felt more pronounced than ever. I shook it off again. "It's just the holidays," I muttered to myself. "Everything will be fine." The doorbell rang, and I quickly snapped back into hostess mode, ready to greet our family. I opened the door to find my parents and siblings standing there, holding gifts and smiles. The moment they stepped inside, the room was filled with warmth and joy. Christmas was in full swing. I pushed my worries aside as I focused on what mattered: my family, the celebration, and the happiness of the night. The moment of betrayal. Dinner was served, and the atmosphere was filled with the sounds of laughter and clinking silverware. Mark sat across from me, engaged in conversation with my brother, but his attention kept drifting. He kept glancing at his phone, checking it under the table. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to be the paranoid wife, but something about his behavior tonight was making me uneasy. "Mark, you okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but I couldn't hide the concern in my voice. He looked up quickly, his face blank. "Yeah, I'm fine," he replied quickly, then went back to his phone. I tried to focus on my family, on the conversation around the table, but it was hard to ignore the growing sense of discomfort. Something wasn't right, and the longer I sat there, the more it gnawed at me. Why was he acting like this? Why was he so preoccupied with his phone? I forced myself to push the thoughts out of my head and enjoy the evening. After all, it was Christmas Eve. I couldn't ruin the night with my doubts, but as the evening went on, Mark's behavior only became more noticeable. He wasn't making eye contact with me. He wasn't joining in the conversation the way he normally did. It was like he was a million miles away, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't reach him. Finally, after dessert, I excused myself to go to the bathroom. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed Mark's phone sitting on the kitchen counter, face up. A message popped up on the screen, and without thinking, I leaned over to read it. My breath caught in my throat as I read the message. It wasn't from a colleague. It wasn't a work-related text. It was from a woman. The message simply read, "I can't wait to see you tonight. I miss you." My world tilted on its axis. The room seemed to spin as I stared at the phone in my hand. I couldn't believe it. My first instinct was to pick it up, to call him out on it right away. But something held me back. The tears started to sting my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Instead, I placed the phone back on the counter and went back to the dinner table, my mind racing. I couldn't let him know I knew. Not yet. I had to think. I had to figure out what to do next. The confrontation. The rest of the night was a blur. My family said their goodbyes, and I numbly went through the motions of cleaning up. Mark was quieter than ever, and I could feel the tension building between us. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands trembled as I washed the dishes. I had to confront him, but I didn't know how. Finally, after my family left, I couldn't wait any longer. I turned to him, my voice trembling. "Mark, we need to talk." He looked at me, his face unreadable. "What's wrong?" I felt a rush of anger surge through me, but I held it back. I couldn't let him see how much this hurt. "You've been acting distant tonight," I said, my voice low. "You've been on your phone, not paying attention to me," and then I saw the message. His eyes widened, and for a split second I saw guilt flash across his face, but it was gone just as quickly. He stood up, his hands raised defensively. "What message?" "Don't lie to me, Mark," I said, my voice shaking. "I saw the message from her." His face fell, and I could feel the air in the room turn cold. He didn't say anything for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost apologetic. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way, but I've been seeing her. I've been cheating on you." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I couldn't breathe. My mind was spinning, but all I could hear was his voice, cold and detached, as he explained how he had been seeing someone else for months. "You've been with her all this time," I whispered, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice flat, "but I can't keep lying to you. I don't love you anymore." The pain was unbearable, the betrayal, the humiliation. I felt like I was suffocating, but in that moment, something shifted inside me. I had spent so much of my life trying to make things work, trying to be the perfect wife, trying to keep everything together. But I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to let him destroy me. I looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a surge of power. It wasn't from him or from what he had done. It was from me, from my own strength. I had the power to choose my next step. "I'm done," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was breaking. "I don't need you to complete me. I am enough on my own." He stood there, stunned, but I didn't wait for him to respond. I turned and walked away, my heart heavy but determined. I wasn't going to let his betrayal tear me down. I wasn't going to let it define me. This was the moment I took control of my life. I stood there, frozen in the kitchen, as Mark's words echoed in my ears. "I've been seeing her. I've been cheating on you." The room felt like it was closing in on me. I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled as I tried to process what he had just said. I had heard the words, but they didn't feel real. It was as if the ground beneath me had been ripped away and I was falling into an endless abyss. I had always prided myself on being a good wife, loyal, loving, supportive. How had this happened? How had I missed the signs? How had I been so blind? I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. "How could you do this?" The words came out before I could stop them. I didn't want to sound weak, but I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. "How could you do this to me, to us?" Mark didn't look at me. His eyes were focused on the floor, and his shoulders were slumped as if the weight of everything had finally hit him. "I'm sorry," he said softly, but it wasn't enough. It could never be enough. I tried to hold myself together, but it was impossible. The betrayal ran too deep. I had given him my heart, my trust, my everything, and he had thrown it all away for someone else. The pain was like a physical wound, sharp and unforgiving. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't even want to know, but I had to. I needed the truth, even if it was going to tear me apart. "Months," he answered, his voice low, almost ashamed. Months. He had been seeing her for months. All the times I had trusted him, all the nights I had waited for him to come home, all the times I had thought everything was fine while he was with her. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I turned away from him, my chest tight, my breath coming in short gasps. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't look at him anymore. "I can't do this," I whispered to myself. Mark reached out to me, his hand tentative. "Please, don't walk away. We can talk about this. I know I've hurt you, but I want to fix it." His words only made me feel more hollow inside. How could I trust him again? How could I go back to a man who had betrayed me so completely? The man I had thought I knew was nothing like the one standing in front of me now. This wasn't the person I had built a life with. This wasn't the man who promised to love me forever. I shook my head, the tears finally spilling down my cheeks. "No, you don't get to fix this. You've already broken it beyond repair." Without another word, I grabbed my coat and walked out of the house. I didn't care if it was Christmas Eve. I didn't care about the decorations or the tree or the dinner I had spent hours preparing. I didn't care about anything anymore. The emotional storm. I walked aimlessly through the neighborhood, my footsteps echoing on the cold pavement. My breath came in shaky bursts, and the air felt thick with the weight of everything I had just learned. How could he? How could he betray me like this? I kept asking myself over and over, but the answer never came. I stopped at a park bench, sitting down with my head in my hands. The tears didn't stop. I had tried to hold it together to stay calm, but it was impossible. The pain was overwhelming, suffocating. I had spent so many years with Mark, building a life together, sharing dreams, making plans for the future. And now, all of that was shattered. I felt like I had no foundation beneath me, like everything I had believed in had crumbled to dust. It was hard to breathe through the hurt. It felt like someone had ripped my heart out and left me with nothing but an empty hole. The man I loved had chosen someone else, and I was left here, alone on a park bench, struggling to pick up the pieces of a life I thought I understood. As I sat there, I tried to calm my thoughts, tried to make sense of what had just happened. But every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was Mark with her. His hands on her, his smile, the way he looked at her. The same way he used to look at me. The humiliation was unbearable. It wasn't just the fact that he had cheated, it was that I had been blind to it for so long. I had trusted him completely, had believed in us, had built my life around him, and he had destroyed it. The moment of clarity. I don't know how long I sat there, letting the tears fall, letting the pain wash over me. But eventually, something inside me shifted. I couldn't stay in this place of hurt forever. I couldn't let it define me. I remembered something my mom had told me when I was younger. Life is about the choices you make, not what happens to you. I had a choice to make. I could let this betrayal ruin me, or I could rise above it. I could let it tear me down, or I could use it as fuel to build something stronger. I stood up, wiping my eyes and taking a deep breath. The first step was to leave the house. I needed space to think, to get away from the pain that was suffocating me. I couldn't be in that place anymore, surrounded by memories of a life that was no longer mine. I started walking again, this time with purpose. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't go back. Not yet. The power of a decision. As I walked through the quiet streets, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to let Mark's betrayal be the thing that destroyed me. I had spent too much of my life living for him, living for our future together. But now, I was going to live for myself. I had always been a strong person. I had always believed in myself. But somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of that. I had let my identity become wrapped up in my relationship, in my role as his wife. But that wasn't who I was. I wasn't just a wife. I was a person, a woman with dreams, with passions, with goals that had nothing to do with anyone else. I had spent so much of my life caring for others, trying to make them happy, that I had forgotten to take care of myself. I had forgotten that I was worthy of happiness, worthy of love, not because of my role in someone else's life, but because of who I was. And now I was going to take control. I was going to start over. I didn't need Mark to be happy. I didn't need anyone to validate my worth. I had everything I needed inside of me. Taking the first step. The next morning, I woke up in a small apartment I had rented for myself, away from the house I had shared with Mark. It was quiet, and the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. I sat up in bed, looking around at the bare walls. It was a far cry from the home I had built with Mark, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing: I was going to be okay. I took a deep breath, and in that moment, I made the decision to fully embrace my independence. I wasn't going to waste time grieving over a man who had never truly valued me. I wasn't going to stay in a place of pain. I was going to rebuild my life, one step at a time. The first step, taking control of my career. I had put my dreams on hold for so long, but now it was time to start focusing on myself. I had always wanted to start my own business, to work for myself, and now I was going to make it happen. I spent the next few days setting up my new life, finding a job that gave me freedom, building a network of supportive friends, and most importantly, taking care of myself. I began exercising again, going on long walks, and rediscovering hobbies I had forgotten about. I was building the foundation of a life that was all my own, and it felt incredible. The days after the confrontation with Mark felt like I was moving through a fog. I didn't know what I was supposed to do next or where to go from here. I had taken that first step, leaving the house and renting a new apartment, but the loneliness was almost unbearable. The silence was deafening, and every room I walked into felt empty, haunted by the ghost of my past life. I kept thinking back to the night before, to the pain and confusion. How could he betray me like that after all we'd been through? The feeling of his cold words, "I don't love you anymore," repeated over and over in my mind. It was a weight I couldn't shake off, no matter how hard I tried. The next few days were a blur. I didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I just wanted to curl up in a ball and disappear. But something inside me, the part that had always been strong, always fought for the good things, refused to let me give up. I couldn't give in to this. I couldn't let the betrayal destroy me. I spent the next few days doing something simple, something that had always helped me clear my mind. I walked. I had always loved walking, especially when I needed to think. I would put on my sneakers, grab my headphones, and just go. The sound of the world around me, the birds, the leaves rustling in the trees, reminded me that life still went on. And even though my world felt like it had come crashing down, the world outside didn't stop. It was still beautiful, still full of possibilities. I walked for hours. Through the park, down streets I had never noticed before, past shops I had only ever glanced at. I let the rhythm of my steps clear my mind. I thought about the past, about everything that had happened between Mark and me. I thought about the woman I had been, trusting, hopeful, and so blinded by love that I had lost myself. And then I thought about the woman I was becoming. Rediscovering myself. The woman I was becoming wasn't defined by Mark or by the betrayal. She wasn't defined by my past mistakes or my failures. She was someone strong, someone who knew her worth. For the first time in a long time, I was starting to realize that I didn't need Mark to complete me. I had always thought I did, but now I knew that the only person I needed was myself. I started doing things I hadn't done in years. I joined a yoga class, something I'd always wanted to try but had never made time for. The first session was tough. My body wasn't as flexible as I remembered, and my mind kept wandering back to the pain I had been carrying. But as the weeks went by, yoga became a form of therapy. It wasn't just about stretching and strengthening my body. It was about clearing my mind, learning to breathe through the pain, and letting go of the things I couldn't control. I also started reading again. I had always been an avid reader, but somewhere along the way, I had stopped making time for it. Now, I found solace in books. They became my escape, my way of reconnecting with myself. I read everything from fiction to self-help books, but most of all, I read stories about women who had been through hardship and come out stronger. Those stories inspired me. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that other people had been through the same kind of pain and had come out the other side stronger. Finding purpose. I started setting small goals for myself, things I had always wanted to do but had never made a priority. I started cooking again, something I had always loved but had stopped doing when life became too busy. I found joy in creating meals for myself, in making my apartment feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep. I also took a hard look at my career. I had always been good at what I did, but I realized that I had been holding myself back. I had been content with the small, safe roles I had played, never pushing myself to go further to take risks. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had survived the worst betrayal of my life, and if I could survive that, I could handle anything. I began reaching out to my professional network, applying for new roles and taking on more challenging projects. It wasn't easy at first. There were moments when I felt like I wasn't good enough, that I didn't deserve the opportunities I was going after. But I kept pushing. I reminded myself that I was worthy of success, that I deserved to have a career I was proud of. Slowly, I started to see the results. I got the promotion I had been working for. I started getting recognition for my hard work. The confidence that had been crushed by Mark's betrayal was starting to come back. Embracing my independence. As I continued to rebuild my life, I began to feel the weight of the past lifting off my shoulders. I had been so focused on Mark, on our relationship, on our future together, that I had lost sight of who I was. But now, I was starting to find myself again. I made a point of spending more time with friends. I reached out to the people who had always supported me, who had been there through thick and thin. I had pushed them away during my marriage, convinced that I didn't need anyone else. But now, I saw just how wrong I had been. True friends were the ones who lifted me up, who reminded me of my worth when I forgot. One evening, I sat down with Clara, my best friend. We met at our favorite cafe, and I couldn't help but smile as we caught up on life. Clara had always been the one person who saw me for who I truly was, and I had missed our time together. "You're glowing," she said, grinning at me. "What's going on?" I laughed, feeling a sense of pride. "I'm starting to live for myself, Clara. I'm starting to realize that I don't need anyone to define me. I'm enough, just as I am." She looked at me, her eyes soft with understanding. "I've seen you change over the last few months. You've become stronger than I ever thought possible, and I'm so proud of you." Hearing her words, I realized just how far I had come. I wasn't the woman who had let herself be defined by someone else. I was the woman who had taken control of her own life, who had rediscovered her strength, her independence, and her worth. The healing process. Even as I embraced my independence, I still had my moments. There were days when I missed Mark, when I wondered if things could have been different. There were days when I wanted to pick up the phone and call him, to hear his voice, to ask him why he had done this to me. But those days were becoming fewer. The more I focused on myself, the more I realized that I didn't need him in my life. I had learned to stand on my own, and that was something no one could take away from me. I had found peace. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. But I had taken the time to heal, to let go of the pain, and to rebuild my life on my own terms. I had learned that I was enough, that I didn't need anyone to complete me. I was already whole. The final decision. It had been months since I last heard from Mark, and honestly, I had stopped thinking about him. I had found new purpose, new strength, and new joy in my life. I didn't need him to apologize or to come back. I had already forgiven myself. But one day, out of nowhere, I received a message from him. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't panic. I didn't feel that old rush of hope or longing. I had moved on. "I miss you," the message read. "I know I've made mistakes. Can we talk?" I stared at the phone for a long time, considering how to respond. But I didn't need to. I already knew the answer. I typed back, "I'm doing great, Mark. I've moved on, and I don't need you in my life anymore." I hit send, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was at peace. I had let go of the past, and now I was ready for the future. It had been a few months since Mark and I had that painful conversation. At first, everything felt like a blur, an overwhelming mix of sadness, anger, and confusion. But now, with the distance I had given myself, I could see clearly. I could breathe again. The pain wasn't gone, not completely. There were still nights when I lay awake in bed, thinking about the life I had lost. But something had changed in me. I had realized that I wasn't the same person who had let Mark's betrayal define her. I had become someone else, someone stronger, someone who had learned how to live again. I was no longer the woman who would fall apart at the mention of his name. No longer the woman who needed his validation to feel worthy. I had learned that I didn't need him, or anyone else, to complete me. I was complete on my own. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with that. Rediscovering my passions. The first thing I did after everything fell apart was focus on rediscovering the things I had loved before my marriage consumed my life. I had always been an artist, but I had abandoned my paints and brushes the moment Mark, and I settled into a routine. Now, with all the time I had on my hands, I dusted off my old art supplies and began to paint again. At first, it felt awkward. My hands weren't as steady as they used to be, and the colors didn't come out quite the way I wanted. But it didn't matter. It wasn't about creating something perfect. It was about doing something that made me feel alive again. Every stroke of the brush was a small victory. Every completed painting was a reminder that I was capable of finding joy, even in the aftermath of pain. I also started reading more, something I had once loved but had stopped doing during the chaos of my marriage. I dove into novels that took me away to different worlds and self-help books that guided me through the healing process. I devoured stories of people who had been broken and had rebuilt themselves stronger than before. It was comforting to know that I wasn't the only one who had gone through something like this. It was also a reminder that healing wasn't linear. Some days would be harder than others, and that was okay. The important thing was to keep moving forward. I reconnected with old hobbies, things I had let fall to the side because I was so busy trying to hold my marriage together. Cooking, journaling, hiking, all of it. The simple things that made me happy. The things that had once defined me before I became so wrapped up in the needs of others. I had forgotten who I was before Mark, before the pain, but now I was rediscovering her. Building new routines. The hardest part was finding my way back to normal life. It was easy to feel lost when everything I thought I knew about myself had crumbled. For a long time, I couldn't even stand to be in the same house. So, I moved out. I rented a small apartment in the city, away from the memories. It was a fresh start, but at first, it felt lonely. But then, as the days turned into weeks, I began to find a rhythm. I set new routines for myself. Every morning, I went for a walk. I didn't have a specific destination. I just walked until I felt clear-headed. Sometimes I would listen to music, other times, I would just let my thoughts wander. I found peace in the stillness, and it was in those quiet moments that I could hear my inner voice again, the voice that had gotten drowned out by the noise of a broken relationship. I started going to the gym as well. It wasn't about losing weight or changing my appearance. It was about taking care of my body and feeling strong. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of the world on my shoulders. I felt capable. I felt strong. I felt like I was finally regaining control over the one thing I could control, myself. Facing the fear of being alone. One of the hardest things to face after the betrayal was the fear of being alone. I had spent so many years defining myself as Mark's wife that I didn't know who I was without him. I feared being alone, feared that I wouldn't be able to survive without the person I had once relied on for everything. But the truth was, I had been alone for much longer than I realized. I had put aside my own dreams and desires in the name of maintaining a marriage that wasn't healthy. I had sacrificed parts of myself, believing that love meant putting someone else's needs above my own. And when Mark left, I had to learn to live for me again. I had to confront that fear of being alone and realize that being alone didn't mean being lonely. I started filling my time with things that made me feel good, things that brought me joy. I focused on building a life that was mine, independent, full of purpose, and free from the shackles of a toxic relationship. In time, I realized that I didn't need anyone else to complete me. I was already whole. I was learning to love myself, and that was the most important relationship I would ever have. Reaching out for support. As much as I had grown, I knew I couldn't do it alone. I reached out to my friends, the ones I had distanced myself from during my marriage. Clara, in particular, had always been there for me, but I had shut her out because I had been so focused on Mark. When I reached out to her again, I expected judgment, but instead, she embraced me with open arms. "You're stronger than you know," Clara said one night, as we sat on my new couch, drinking wine and talking about everything that had happened. "You've been through so much, but you're still standing, and that's amazing." Her words stayed with me. They reminded me that I wasn't alone in this. I had a support system, people who cared about me, who wanted to see me succeed. They didn't want to see me suffer or wallow in my pain. They wanted to help me move forward, and I was ready to accept that help. I also began to reconnect with my family, especially my parents. They had always been there for me, but I had kept my distance when I was married, not wanting to burden them with my problems. But now, I needed them more than ever. They didn't judge me for what had happened. They didn't make me feel ashamed. They simply supported me and reminded me that I was loved. A new outlook on life. Weeks turned into months, and I found myself growing stronger each day. The pain of the betrayal didn't disappear, but it didn't control me anymore. I was taking control of my life, my choices, and my future, and that made all the difference. I started to think about what I wanted out of life, what truly made me happy. I had spent so much time focused on others that I had forgotten what I wanted for myself. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anything to Mark. It was about living for myself, finding happiness, and building a life that was authentic to who I was. One night, as I sat on the balcony of my apartment, looking out over the city lights, I realized something important. I had come a long way. I wasn't the same person I had been when Mark left. I was stronger, wiser, and more confident in who I was. And that was something no one could ever take away from me. The moment of empowerment. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. I had learned to love myself. I had learned to stand on my own 2 feet. I had learned that I didn't need anyone to complete me. And most importantly, I had learned that I was enough, just as I was. The Christmas miracle that had once seemed so distant, the idea of a new beginning, was finally here. It hadn't come in the way I expected. It hadn't come wrapped in a pretty bow. But it had come in the form of self-love, independence, and the realization that I was capable of creating the life I wanted. I was no longer the woman who had been betrayed. I was a woman who had taken control of her life, and I was proud of who I had become. I spent the next few weeks getting used to the silence in my new apartment. It wasn't the emptiness of being alone, like I had feared at first. It was the calm I had been craving, the space to breathe without the weight of my past hovering over me. I'd finally moved away from the memories that had haunted me and begun building something new, something just for me. It wasn't always easy. There were days when I found myself staring at the walls, feeling the tug of the life I used to have. But I kept reminding myself that this was the future I was creating, and it didn't involve Mark. It didn't involve anyone else. This was about me, my own journey, my own happiness. I had always been a career-focused person, but I realized how much I had let my ambitions slip into the background. After Mark left, I thought I'd have to rebuild everything from scratch, but I had forgotten something important. I had always been capable. I started by reaching out to people I'd known in my professional network, colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years, mentors who had always encouraged me but whose advice I had ignored in favor of my marriage. I began sending emails, reconnecting, and looking for new opportunities. It felt a little strange at first, like I was pushing myself into a world I had abandoned, but I quickly found that it was exactly what I needed. I was good at what I did, better than I had given myself credit for. My phone buzzed one day with an email from a former colleague, a manager at a company I had once worked for. She had heard about my recent separation and offered to help me with some career advice. She even mentioned a job opening in her department. I was ecstatic but didn't want to get my hopes up too high. Still, the fact that someone had reached out to me, offering help, made me feel like I was moving in the right direction. A new opportunity. I decided to apply for the job. It was a big step, but I wasn't going to let fear hold me back. I spent hours crafting my resume, making sure it reflected everything I had learned and achieved in my career. I worked tirelessly on my cover letter, pouring my heart into it, highlighting not just my professional skills, but the strength I had gained over the past few months. It felt like a new chapter. When I clicked send, I didn't feel the usual nerves that came with job applications. I didn't feel like I needed to wait for someone else's approval to prove I was worthy. This time, I knew I was enough, just as I was, and I wasn't waiting for anyone to give me permission to succeed. A week later, I got the call. I had an interview scheduled for the following Monday. When I hung up the phone, I felt a wave of excitement and fear wash over me. I had been so focused on healing, on rebuilding, that I had almost forgotten about the drive I once had. But now it was back. I was ready. The interview. The morning of the interview, I woke up early, feeling strangely calm. I had gone over my resume and answers 100 times, but this time I wasn't nervous. I was confident. I knew I had the skills and experience to excel in the job, and I wasn't afraid to show it. I spent extra time getting ready, choosing a professional outfit that made me feel powerful. I wasn't the same person who had walked into interviews before, uncertain of herself and always second-guessing her worth. This time, I was prepared to take charge. This time, I knew I belonged. When I walked into the interview room, I felt a surge of confidence. The familiar faces from my past, the managers who knew me well, greeted me with smiles. They knew I was capable, and that made the experience feel different from anything I had done before. The questions flowed easily, and I could see that my enthusiasm and energy impressed them. We talked about my previous experiences, the challenges I had faced, and how I had grown. I spoke about the lessons I had learned during my personal struggles, how they had given me strength, and how they shaped my work ethic. As the interview came to a close, the lead interviewer smiled at me. We'll be in touch soon, but I have to say, you've made a great impression. We're really excited about your potential here. I walked out of that interview with my head held high. I knew I had done my best. Whether I got the job or not didn't matter. What mattered was that I had shown up for myself. I had taken control of my future. And for the first time in a long time, I felt proud of the woman I had become. Facing the fear of change. The weeks that followed were filled with ups and downs. On the one hand, I was flourishing at work. I threw myself into every project, working long hours and showing everyone around me how serious I was about my career. But on the other hand, there were still moments of loneliness. I spent weekends in my apartment, catching up on projects and focusing on my own personal growth, but it often left me feeling disconnected from the world. It wasn't that I didn't enjoy my alone time, it was the realization that I didn't have anyone to share my successes with. There were moments when I wished I could call Mark, share my triumphs, and hear his voice. But I had made the decision to move on, and deep down, I knew it was the right choice. I was doing this for me, not for anyone else. Still, the loneliness stung. I missed the companionship, the connection I had once shared with Mark, but I reminded myself that this was part of the process. I had to learn to be okay on my own, and with each passing day, it became a little easier. I started spending more time with my friends, reconnecting with people I had put on the back burner. Clara was my rock through all of this, and we spent weekends together, talking, laughing, and just being there for each other. And then, one Sunday afternoon, I received a call that changed everything. The call. It was a call from the company where I had interviewed. I had thought I'd hear back sooner, but when I saw the number pop up on my phone, I felt my stomach drop. "Hello," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hi, is this protagonist's name?" the voice on the other end asked. "Yes, this is she." "This is hiring manager's name from company name. We're pleased to offer you the position. We were really impressed with your interview and your experience, and we think you'll be a great fit for the team." For a moment, I couldn't process the words. I had actually gotten the job. After all the work, all the effort I had put in, I had succeeded. "Thank you," I said, my voice shaky with emotion. "I'm honored. I'm so excited for this opportunity. We'll send over the details of your offer and schedule your start date. Congratulations again. We look forward to working with you." The call ended, and I sat there, staring at my phone, feeling a rush of emotions. I had done it. I had made it on my own. I had created this opportunity for myself, and it was the beginning of something incredible. The moment of empowerment. Later that evening, I went for a walk, as I often did when I needed to think. The streets were quiet, and the evening air was crisp. I smiled to myself, reflecting on how far I had come. Just a few months ago, I had been devastated. I had been broken by betrayal, unsure of my worth, questioning everything I knew about myself. But now, I was walking down the street with my head held high, knowing that I had built a new life for myself. I had done this. I had found my strength. I had proven to myself that I could overcome anything. The pain was still there, lingering in the background, but it no longer defined me. It no longer had a hold on me. For the first time in years, I felt free. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. The future. As I sat in my apartment that evening, reflecting on everything I had accomplished, I realized something important. I was no longer waiting for someone else to validate my worth. I wasn't looking for approval from Mark or anyone else. I was living for myself. The future was mine to create, and I was determined to make it beautiful. I picked up my phone and started drafting an email to the hiring manager, accepting the job offer. I had taken the first step towards something new, something that was mine. The next chapter of my life was just beginning, and I was ready to embrace it. Conclusion of Part 5. This was my moment, my time to shine. I was no longer the woman who had been betrayed. I was the woman who had risen from the ashes, stronger, wiser, and more powerful than I had ever been before. And the best part, I wasn't waiting for anyone to tell me I was enough. I already knew. It had been months since Mark and I last spoke. I had long since given up on the idea of him coming back or even reaching out. I was at peace with my life, and I was starting to build something that felt real. Every day, I felt more like myself, stronger than ever, and more confident in my choices. I was busy with work, starting my new job, making new friends, and settling into my new life. I wasn't lonely anymore. I had learned to enjoy my own company, to find joy in the things I did alone. My weekends were filled with walks, new hobbies, time with friends, and plenty of quiet reflection. The pain that had once consumed me was now a distant memory, and I was proud of how far I had come. But just when I thought I had everything under control, just when I felt like I had put the past behind me, I got a text from an unfamiliar number. My heart skipped a beat as I saw the message preview. "Can we talk?" The text was simple, but it carried a weight that made my stomach churn. I didn't have to look at the name to know who it was. It was Mark. He had found me, and now he wanted to talk. The man who had broken my heart, shattered my world, he was back. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my mind racing. Why was he reaching out now? After everything he had done, after all the pain he had caused me, what could he possibly have to say? I knew I had changed. I had grown stronger, more self-sufficient, and more independent than I had ever been. But even with all of that, the thought of facing him again stirred something inside me. Was I ready to hear what he had to say? Was I ready to face the past I had worked so hard to move on from? I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, letting the emotions settle. I wasn't the same woman who had fallen apart when he left me. I wasn't the same woman who had clung to the hope of reconciliation. I was someone else now, someone who had learned to live for herself. I decided to respond. "What do you want to talk about?" I typed, keeping my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. The phone buzzed almost immediately. "I've made a huge mistake," the text read. "I've been thinking about you a lot. I miss you. I want to explain everything. Can we meet?" I felt my chest tighten as I read his words. He missed me. After everything, after the betrayal, after the lies, he missed me. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to tell him everything I had been holding back, all the anger and hurt I had suppressed. But another part of me, the part that had found peace and strength, knew that this wasn't about him anymore. This was about me. "I'll meet you," I replied, "but this conversation is on my terms." I took a deep breath and hit send. I was done letting him control my emotions, my choices, my future. Whatever he had to say, I was going to hear it, but I wasn't going to let it define me. Not anymore. The meeting. A few days later, we met at a cafe near my apartment. It was a place I had visited often, one of my favorite spots. I arrived early, needing the time to gather my thoughts before I saw him again. The cafe was quiet, and I sat at a table by the window, sipping my coffee and trying to calm the nervous energy that had been buzzing in my chest since I agreed to meet him. I knew this meeting wasn't just about Mark, it was about me, too. It was a chance for me to reclaim the closure I needed. It was a chance to put the final piece of my past behind me and take one last step toward my future. When Mark walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. His hair was shorter, his face a little more worn. He looked older, like he had been through something himself, but none of that mattered to me. What mattered was that I had changed. I had become someone who no longer needed him to complete her. He walked toward the table, hesitating for a moment before sitting down across from me. "Hey," he said, his voice uncertain. I nodded, not sure what to say. I had so many questions, so many things I wanted to ask him, but I held back. This wasn't the time to rehash the past. This was about moving forward, about getting the closure I needed. "I didn't expect to hear from you," I said quietly. "After everything, I didn't think you'd reach out." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, I should have reached out sooner. I've been thinking about you a lot, about what I did, and I've been trying to make sense of everything." "Make sense of what?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. "You left me for someone else. You chose her and you didn't even look back. What's there to make sense of?" He looked down, his eyes full of regret. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you until it was too late." "Too late," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's always too late with you, Mark. I spent so much of my life waiting for you to come back, to realize what you were losing. But I've learned that I don't need you. I don't need anyone to complete me. I've already moved on." He looked at me, his expression a mixture of guilt and sadness. "I know I messed up. I can't undo the past, but I'm asking for a second chance. I've realized what I had, and I'm sorry for taking it for granted. Can we start over?" I shook my head, feeling the tightness in my chest. The pain I had felt when he left me was still there, but it no longer had a hold on me. I wasn't the same woman who had begged him to come back. I was someone else now. "Mark," I said, my voice steady, "I've already started over. I've built my life without you, and I'm not going back to a place where I have to wait for you to make up your mind. I'm stronger than I was when you left. I'm happier without you." He looked at me, his face softening. "I understand. I never wanted to hurt you, but I did, and I'm sorry." I nodded, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. This was it. This was the closure I needed. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said, standing up. "But I won't be part of it. I've learned to live for myself, and I'm never going back to the way things were." As I turned to leave, I felt lighter. I had taken back control of my life. I had faced my past and let it go. And I knew, with certainty, that I was on the right path. The final step, embracing my future. Walking away from that cafe, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had faced the man who had broken my heart, and I had let him go. I hadn't needed his apology to heal. I had already healed on my own. In the days that followed, I focused even more on building my future. I took on new projects at work, expanded my social circle, and started planning for things I had put off for so long. I took a weekend trip by myself to the beach, something I had always wanted to do. The sun, the ocean, the freedom, it was exactly what I needed to remind myself that I was capable of creating my own happiness. Mark's return had been a reminder of how far I had come. The woman who had been devastated by his betrayal was no longer here. I was stronger. I was wiser. I was free. And now, I was ready for whatever came next. Conclusion of Part 6. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. I had learned that I could survive anything life threw at me, and in the process, I had discovered a strength I never knew I had. I wasn't waiting for anyone else to give me permission to be happy. I was creating my own happiness. And nothing and no one could take that away from me. I woke up that morning feeling the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. The sun was creeping through my window, casting a soft glow over my room. It was quiet, no rushing, no chaos, no worries. Just the gentle hum of the world outside, reminding me that life still went on, even after everything I had been through. I sat up in bed, stretching my arms above my head, and took a deep breath. The silence was comforting. It wasn't the lonely silence I had feared before, but a peaceful kind of quiet. A quiet that meant I had found my way back to myself. The past few months had been a whirlwind of self-discovery and healing. I had felt the heartbreak and the pain of betrayal, and I had let myself grieve. But I had also made the choice to heal. I had decided that I wasn't going to be defined by what had happened to me. I was going to define my own life. As I stood up, I glanced around my apartment. The space was simple, but it was mine. I had decorated it with things I loved, bright paintings, plants that made the room feel alive, cozy furniture that invited me to relax. It was the home I had built for myself, a place where I could finally be at peace. And I was at peace. Building my future. The weeks after the meeting with Mark had been a turning point. I hadn't just let go of the past, I had taken control of my future. I had no idea what the future would look like, but I was determined to make it one I could be proud of. At work, things were going better than I could have imagined. I had thrown myself into my new job, and it felt like I was finally in the right place. The confidence I had gained from standing up for myself had translated into my professional life. I was taking on new projects, speaking up in meetings, and feeling like I was truly contributing to the team. I was growing in ways I had never thought possible. But work wasn't the only thing that had changed. My personal life had begun to flourish, too. I spent more time with friends, reconnecting with those I had lost touch with during my marriage. Clara, of course, had been my rock throughout it all, but there were other people, too, people who had supported me from the start, who had been there for me when I needed them most. And then there was me, someone I was finally getting to know again. The beauty of solitude. For so long, I had feared being alone. The idea of loneliness had haunted me during my marriage, when I had convinced myself that I couldn't live without Mark. I had put everything into our relationship, sacrificing pieces of myself just to keep the peace. But now, I had learned that being alone didn't mean being lonely. I was finally starting to enjoy my own company. I had started taking long walks by myself, rediscovering the joy in simple things. I went to the park and sat under the shade of a tree, listening to the birds, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. I spent my weekends visiting local art galleries, trying out new recipes, and reading books I had put off for too long. I had realized that the things I loved were still there, waiting for me to rediscover them. And that was one of the greatest gifts of all, the ability to enjoy my own life, to create my own happiness, independent of anyone else. Reconnecting with the past. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to visit my childhood home. It had been years since I had been back, and I didn't know why, but something inside me told me it was time. I drove through the familiar streets, past the old bookstore we used to visit, and finally pulled into the driveway of the house where I had grown up. The house looked smaller than I remembered, but it was still filled with memories, memories of a time before Mark, before all the pain. I stood outside for a moment, taking in the sight of it. My parents had moved out years ago, but the house still belonged to them. I rang the doorbell, and when my mom opened the door, her face lit up with surprise. "Sweetheart," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug. "I wasn't expecting you. Come in, come in." We spent the afternoon talking, reminiscing about the past. It felt good to be surrounded by the warmth of family again. For so long, I had felt disconnected from them, too wrapped up in my marriage to really spend time with the people who had always supported me. But today, it felt like everything was falling into place. I was finally present. I wasn't running from my past, I was embracing it. Facing the future with confidence. As I sat across from my mom, sipping tea, I realized that I had truly changed. I was no longer the person who had clung to a relationship that wasn't right for her. I was no longer the woman who had doubted her worth. I was the woman who had faced her darkest moments and come out the other side stronger. I had learned that the key to moving forward wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about accepting it and using it as fuel to create something better. I had spent so much time worrying about what I had lost, but now I understood that what I had gained was far more important. "I'm proud of you," my mom said quietly, her eyes soft with emotion. "You've come so far." I smiled, feeling a lump form in my throat. "Thank you, Mom. I feel proud of myself too." The unexpected call. It was a few weeks after my visit to my parents' house that I received a phone call I hadn't expected. It was from the company where I had interviewed months ago. My heart raced as I answered the call, not knowing what to expect. "Hello," I said, my voice steady but curious. "Hi, is this protagonist's name?" The voice on the other end was familiar. It was the hearing manager from the interview. "Yes, this is she. I just wanted to let you know that we've been really impressed with you and your work. We'd like to offer you the position you applied for." The words took a moment to sink in. I had done it. I had landed the job. "Are you still interested in the position?" the hearing manager asked, sensing my silence. "Yes," I said, my voice filled with excitement. "Yes, absolutely, I'm thrilled." As I hung up the phone, I felt a wave of excitement wash over me. I had worked hard for this. I had pushed myself beyond my limits, and now it was paying off. This was my opportunity to continue growing, to take my career to the next level. It was a reminder that I was capable of achieving whatever I set my mind to. The new chapter begins. The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of preparations, packing up my things, preparing for the new job, and getting ready for the next phase of my life. I had grown so much over the past months, and now I was stepping into a future full of possibilities. I moved into a new apartment closer to work, excited about the new chapter I was starting. It was a fresh start, and for the first time, I was excited about what lay ahead. The past was behind me, and I wasn't looking back. The night before I started my new job, I sat in my living room looking out at the city lights. I thought about how far I had come, the pain, the heartache, the uncertainty. But now I was stronger than ever. I had learned to stand on my own, to trust myself, and to never settle for less than I deserved. Final reflection. As I sat there, the weight of everything I had been through felt lighter. I had reclaimed my life, my happiness, and my future. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every single step. I was no longer the woman who had been broken by betrayal. I was the woman who had chosen to rise above it. And now, as I looked toward the future, I knew that the best was yet to come. Empowerment and moving on. "I don't need anyone to complete me," I whispered to myself, the words I had learned to live by. The future was wide open, and I was ready to embrace it with everything I had. This was my time, my life, and I was finally living it on my own terms.